I'm John Quesenberry, San Diego, California. Joined the Army at 18. Ended up in officer candidate school, flight school, some time in Germany, flying airplanes, sent to helicopter school in 1966, and left Munich, Germany, and went directly to the 187th that formed in October of 1966 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I ended up being the movements officer for the unit to get it over there. I was also the guy who suggested the name Blackhawks because as a kid I read these comic books about a group of people that were called Blackhawks, and that's probably about a 1949 or whatever comic book thing, and the XO actually drew out the first Blackhawk. He copied the logo as best he could do it, but we did it right there in his office before we left Fort Bragg. We formed in late to middle October of '66. We got our helicopters directly from the Bell plant in Fort Worth in December of that year, and by March of '67 we were in Vietnam. I think the smell sort of overcame everything, was one of the issues. The other thing is, as I was going up from Benoit, where I flew into country, and I'd come in alone because I was the movements officer, and myself and two other guys came behind the unit. The unit flew over directly in C-141 airlifters. And so we went into Benoit in a commercial airplane and sat there for a couple nights until they found out where we were and they picked us up. So they picked us up in a Huey, and I was sitting on the side by an open door. And as we lifted off the pad and started up, I looked down at the ground and I said, I have never seen so many different shades of green in all my life. Just a lush landscape of foliage of every different shade of green I'd ever seen. About a third of the people, maybe not quite that many, went to other units, and we got a third of people backfilled from various and sundry units to fill us. We were up on the Cambodian border, about 95 miles north of Saigon, northwest of Saigon, and we went in to support the 196 Light Infantry Brigade, and we were not even operational yet when the 196 got on C-130s and went north to form a new division. So that left us way up on the Cambodian border with practically nobody, except a few infantry troops, engineer troops, and some artillery, and a brand new company that didn't have its sea legs about it, if you will. In this unit, and this is really important because it's probably true of everybody that forms up a unit and gets ready to go, there were I'm going to say there were 10 or 15 majors. And then there were those captains like myself that were fairly new captains. The majors were all older. They were qualified in both fixed wing and rotary wing, but they weren't combat arms. And the rule of thumb, or what it was, is if you were going to command an attack helicopter company in Vietnam, an assault helicopter company in Vietnam, you had to be combat arms. That means you had to be infantry, artillery, or armor. And the two guys that commanded or brought the company up to speed at Fort Bragg and deployed us were both transportation. The operations officer was a West Pointer and an infantry officer. And he knew when we got to Vietnam, these guys were going to be history, and he ended up commanding the unit. He knew that before we ever left Fort Bragg. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. But all of those majors, with the exception of two, left the unit. Three majors stayed. We swallowed up another unit, which was called the 602nd Maintenance, commanded by a major, but they became an integral part. We operated as a single team. And all of those majors' positions, as far as the gun platoon, the two assault platoons, were filled by captains. You had this montage of captains, of which I was one, and my group had pretty much all gone to flight school and graduated in April of '64, and then gone to helicopter school in Munich and gotten qualified in the Huey. We had a second group of captains that had gone to flight school a couple years after us, had gone but only as helicopter pilots, had gone to Korea and were flying OH-23s. They weren't even qualified in Hueys. And then when they came to the 187th in October of '66, they needed to be qualified in Hueys. So you had guys who had aviation experience in both small little helicopters flying in Korea, but weren't qualified in Hueys. And you had those of us that had almost 3 years of flying experience, but 0 time in a helicopter, but Huey qualified. So absolutely no experience among the captains. And then all the other warrant officers were all directly out of flight school. They were the blind leading the blind. And not only was it bad, but we've got, I can't tell you exactly how many it is. It's somewhere between 7 and 12 warrant officers that were deployed with us, that were in fixed-wing school, and were within 2 weeks of graduation from fixed-wing school, and got diverted to rotary wing school, and got assigned to the unit. So they had no flight time at all in fixed-wing. They'd all just finished their fixed-wing training, and they sent them to helicopter school, and then they sent them to us. So it was literally the blind leading the blind, with no training before we went. So I thought that was very important, and only those guys like myself that were there on the ground at the beginning understand how ill-equipped and untrained we were, but we overcame all that crap. We quickly started flying operational missions and got our feet wet. And probably the best thing I can say is I was a slick driver, troop lift guy, and carried the troops in, carried them out, carried in their bullets and mail and replacements and wounded and whatever was required. But literally for us, it was the blind leading the blind because we just had no operational experience. But after about 2 months, we were flying more hours than any other unit in country. For 2 months in a row, we were at the 3,300 flight hours in a single month, competing against other companies that had fully established base camps, living in air-conditioned hooches, had maintenance areas built, and we were living in tents. Vietnam. Lots of waiting around for things to happen. Lots and lots of bad information. Absolutely unbelievable mental and physical support for one another. People that were willing to lay their life on the line without a second thought for you or anybody else in your aircraft. And there was this quid pro quo among all of us that we would get each other out. That's what makes the very, very close bond that brings the 187th together here, because we all served together, and the unit is highly decorated, and everybody pretty much served out of that area up on the Cambodian border, and the feeling, the close-knitness came time after time after time. Combat assaults. We supported everybody in 3rd Corps, whether it's 25th Division, 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red 1, 173rd Airborne Brigade, 199th, 198th Light Infantry Brigades. There's probably somebody else in there the 9th Infantry Division later on down by the Delta. We also supported the Australians in a place called Nui Dat, which was out towards to the east towards the ocean, and we also supported the 11th Armored Cav, which was also out to the east. Of all the units that we supported, infantry units, I always liked the Australians best because they got on the helicopter, they got off the helicopter. It didn't make any difference where you were getting shot at. They always did it the same way. Where certain American units and certain ARVN units had a hesitancy to get on or get off, and sometimes they just let you sit there, and you'd say, "Hey, I'm a target. As long as I'm on the ground, I'm a target, and I don't want to be here very long." We lost people during that time, very, very close friends. It was always very sad, but they're among the pilots. it was sort of a grim humor when you would go out on a mission and you knew it was going into a bad area where you most likely would get shot up pretty bad. We used to tell each other, by the way, if you don't make it back, can I have your tape recorder? Or can I have your whatever from, because we were living in tents and we were living pretty bad. So there was always that grim feeling. There was also another aspect, and I don't know whether anybody else will tell you this, but certainly among our cohort of people, we all knew what the rules were as far as if you went down. If you went down and you were dead, the benefits stopped to your family. I had a wife and 2 young kids. If you went down and you weren't declared dead, then the benefits continued to roll. So we all, at least in my platoon, we all swore an oath to one another, even if I was a smoking hole in the ground, and everybody knew it. Somebody said, somebody got out of that and went away, so the benefits would keep going. Unfortunately, that probably caused a lot of misconceptions later off for the POWs and MIAs, but nonetheless, I mean, guys do what they need to do to support their families. I talked about the rules of engagement, and that's sort of my hot button from here on out. And when you're in a war and people start shooting at you, the only rule of engagement is kill them before they kill you. And I'll give you a couple examples. In my birds, I was always the aircraft commander, the guy who was responsible for either the flight or the aircraft that I was in. And I made my crew clear, if somebody's shooting at us and you got a visual on them and you think it's endangering us, you shoot them. I'll sort out all the problems later on. That's my problem, not your problem. Your problem is to keep us alive. The other thing about the crew in the bird, you had a crew chief and a gunner, and I don't know, that tail boom's back there something like 48 feet or something like that, and it's got a tail rotor turned around. If that tail rotor gets caught in the trees or anything like that, and you lose it, you're going to start spinning and liable to crash. So it was very vital to keep that tail rotor out of the trees, and we were habitually overloaded. We always overloaded because if we could do it in 3 lifts instead of 4 lifts, that was one lift to be exposed to get shot and shot down. So the guys flying the bird, myself and the pilot, would just listen to the crew chief. And they'd say, move your tail rotor left, a couple feet. Just move it left until I tell you to stop. Come back you can come back another whatever feet. But they were the eyes and ears back there, so it was a total crew situation. Likewise, if there was fire coming up that was a threat to you, often if you were in formation or something like that, rather than a single ship, there wasn't anything you could do. You just pray to God that they'd get effective fire on them. But certain outfits, 25th Division in particular, had this feeling that they were working in an environment. I can't remember what the term was, but it had to do with the fact that they had sort of pacified the villagers, which was just pure unadulterated bullshit. I mean, we were getting shot down all the time in there and shot up and losing people. And I remember this one brand new W1 who was ornery from Abbeville, Alabama, and George Taylor said, Captain, I don't mind getting shot down by a VC or the NVA, but damn, I'm getting tired of getting hosed by friendly fire, from friendly farmers. So it was, again, the rules of engagement. And that's one of my hot buttons now with the troops that we have engaged. And if there's anything I can tell you about your generation is stay on the politicians about those rules of engagement. Because when people start shooting at you, you're there to do your job. They put you there, and they're not standing behind you. Another example of that, and I'll sort of conclude with any other questions you might have. I ran a mission in support of an infantry battalion, and the infantry battalions would go in defensive positions at night out in the jungle. In this particular case, it was sugarcane field or a pineapple field or something like that. And we would get there shortly after first light, and we'd bring in their food and water and take out all their heavy equipment that they'd use to defend themselves with, machine guns and everything else, that they were not going to pack and move along that day. And it was during the time of a couple days ceasefire or something like that. And we landed, and as we landed, the rotor wash blew the grass away a little bit, and there were 4 bodies, all covered up with ponchos. All of them had been killed that night during the second day of the ceasefire. And I thought to myself, ain't no rules of war in this game. It's either stay alive or get killed. And that sort of reinforced in me the whole folly of all these rules and ceasefires and all this other stuff that was just political make-believe. And then I'll leave you with one final thought. On my 3rd tour in Vietnam flying helicopters, I was privileged to be up in Da Nang, very close to the DMZ, in the June 72 into February of 73. We bombed the North in 1973 for, 15 days or something like with B-52s. The war ended. The war just ended. And I look back on that date and then I say, why didn't we do that in 1967? Why didn't we do it in 1968? Why didn't we do it in 1969? Why did we have to lose almost 60,000 people and probably 4 or 5 times that many more people to wounds and mental anguish and everything that they'll never recover for? And that's when I realized the folly of war. Although I was no longer in the unit, when I left, Joe Burns, who was the last commander with the Black Hawk call sign, was being pressured by headquarters to change the name because a cav unit had come in country from Fort Riley and their lineage went back to the Indian Wars, and their call sign was Black Hawk. Joe refused to do it, so when he left in March of '68, his replacement was forced into renaming the unit. But as a footnote to that, I've met people through the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association that were with that unit called Black Hawks. And that unit, once it got in country and forced us out of our call sign, disbanded and their assets went elsewhere. So in effect, we lost our name tag, or we lost our call sign, which, I worked for so many units over there, infantry units, that they would call us by name. We were the first choice.